Welcome on in, everybody. It's your boy Gsluke here with a little DFS preview, or I should say maybe DFS review of last week at the ZOZO Championship. Gonna go through what went well, what didn't go so well. Overall, just kind of give you an idea of what we can take away from last week and what we can use, of course, this week for the CJ Cup, which I'm also going to do a little preview at the end there. So we'll talk through that golf course, the field, which for the CJ Cup is unbelievable. In fact, so good that I'm probably going to go up there for a few rounds. It's only a 6-hour drive from South Florida, which surprised me probably just as much as it would surprise a lot of you. It's at the south end of South Carolina, literally just above Georgia. So it's not that much of a trek. So I might make my way up there. Either way, though, let's get this thing started. I've got a coffee in my hand. So we're waking up here, no shave, right? Because it's Monday morning, right? You know, it's those Monday morning blues, but that's what the stream's here for, right? To get us back on track, talk through what we need to know for this week, and have some fun in the process. So we already got Sack down there. What's going on, brother? Hopefully you're doing well here this Monday. And let's start this off with a look at the GPP winning lineup. So that's how I want to start these streams. We're going to look at the slate in general, what you needed to have to hit the nuts this week. And then afterwards, we're going to go through my player pool, my exposure, how I ended up doing this week, all that sort of fun stuff. And what we can learn, and of course, a little bit of transparency along the process, right? Kind of showing you guys how a DFS pro like myself is doing week to week, whether it's big wins, big losses. We're going to show you all of them. So, and I'm going to try and keep it a little bit hidden at this point, right? Until we get to that point, a little bit of added entertainment value, a little bit of a suspense in the air. So we'll get to my exposure later, but the winning lineup was Saul Goodman, who's a very prominent voice on Twitter. So first off, congrats, Saul Goodman. I love to see at the top of leaderboards. But in either circumstance, it had Xander and Hovland up top. So two of the more easy to predict names, right? I was on Victor Hovland like crazy. I also had 35% of Xander Schauffele. Actually, I think it was 40% by the end of the week because he came in like 24% owned. So no brainers there up top. Keegan Bradley ended up winning. The first real question mark or guy that kind of surprises you is going to be a Ricky Fowler, right? 5.5% owned. And honestly, that ownership is a little bit higher than I expected too. Now, granted, it's a limited field event. You're not dealing with every single player in the field being active. So you're going to get higher ownership numbers across the board. But 1.1% Rio Hisatune, I mean, that's the nuts play right there, right? 1.1% owned, $6,400. Nearly had the under 60 bonus. So if he would have just shot under par on Sunday, would have been even more important to have in this sort of lineup. So he ended up edging out Johnny Dakota by 0.5 points, which was a little bit of a different build here. So rather than being Xander and Hovland up top, which you can see Xander wasn't really an optimal play, right? He had scored 86 points. The reason why this lineup worked is first off, he had Bradley and Fowler together, like a lot of the other players up top did. That was kind of like the key to getting to the nuts, was having that combination. But he had Hayden Buckley and Rio Hisatune. This lineup was a lot more balanced, right? So you had Hovland up top. You had somebody like Sahith Theegala there at 97 points. He scored like crazy on Saturday. Shot 7 under par, had a birdie streak there, nearly a bogey-free round. Ended up giving that back on hole number 11. But in either circumstance, there were multiple ways to get up here, right? But you had to have Keegan Bradley. And this lineup, in fact, didn't even have Ricky Fowler, right? So the top one had both of them. That's how he got to it. DK Law down here had Ricky Fowler, but not Keegan Bradley up top. So you see all of these non-perfect lineups ended up getting the job done because, you know, the winner had Xander Schauffele, who was far from an optimal play at $10,800. I just kind of want to show you that because to win a GPP for golf specifically, you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't always have to have Rio Hisatune, $6,400, 1.1% owned. I mean, look at this. Bo Hostler was in this lineup. He finished in 16th place. Tom Hoagie was in the second place in lineup with a T9th finish. Even in this lineup, right, you had what? They were pretty solid across the board. This was a really balanced lineup. In fact, this guy kind of has to be sick to his stomach that he didn't win the GPP because, I mean, look at it, right? His worst player was a tied for 9th, and it was Xander Schauffele. I mean, that's kind of rough, right? The placement points for Keegan Bradley is certainly what held this lineup back from getting the nuts lineup. But you kind of got to feel sick for your stomach for that guy. This lineup had, let's see, a Lee Hodges in it, right? Tied for 25th, and he still finished in 4th place in this GPP. I just want to show you this because when you're taking low-owned players, I mean, the highest-owned player in this lineup, right, was a Victor Hovland at 17%. You don't have to hit the nuts to win the GPP. Whereas when we get to ownership a little bit later, if Sanjay would have been an optimal play, if Cam Young would have been an optimal play, if we'll go through all of those sort of chalky, top 3 or 4 players. If any of those players would have been in the optimal build, these lineups would have no chance, right? And this is why you take the contrarian approach. This is why we go out there and us touts out there are talking about you want to be contrarian, you want to get leverage to the field, so on and so forth, so that when you don't have a perfect week, you can still go out there and cash out. So let's look through a few more of these lineups, just get an idea of what some of the trends were going through this. So, brought up the wrong tab there, my bad. I can see you down there in chat. Tom, what's going on? Drug Supplies, which interesting name. That's all I'm going to say about that. Had Steven Yeager, who finished in 40th place and finished in 5th place. But again, Thigala, you see him in a lot of these top lineups. He was a piece of leverage in that 8K range that I talked about quite a bit. I mean, we played Keegan Bradley in bunches this week. You love to see the 8K range coming through. And that was kind of what I talked about on the Wednesday live stream, if you remember, is that this 8K range was going way under-owned. Right now, Sahith Thigala, I actually thought would come in a little bit lower owned. So some of that late steam got him up there to 9%. But Keegan Bradley, I knew was going to be underutilized. Guys like Corey Connors, right? You remember, he didn't have the best week, right? But he was that same sort of player that was going under-owned in the 8K range. So I played almost all of them, right? And some of them struck out, like a Corey Connors, like a Davis Riley, for example. And then some of them were absolute home runs, like a Bradley and Thigala, who you'll see they were in almost all of my top lineups, and led me to an okay week. Again, kind of starting to give away how we did here, but I'm going to keep some of that suspense. Let's go through the rest of the top 10 just real quickly. It's another Hovland lineup, had Thigala, Mito Pereira, who finished in 45th but made a ton of birdies. So it makes sense that he scored just decently, right? 65 points. 7th, you had a Cam Smith lineup in there. Otherwise, a lot of the similar names. In 8th place, a KH Lee sighting. Again, a lot of just those core 4 or 5 plays mixed together. In 9th, a Luke List sighting. This lineup's actually not that bad. Surprised it didn't finish a little bit higher. And in 10th place, Kurt Kitayama sighting. So you can see, even with one dud, you can still get a top 10 finish in these GPPs. I just gave it away. We're going to get to it here in a second, though. You don't have to be perfect. That's the whole point here. I mean, even Saul Goodman, right? You can see I won $522, which is actually a slight negative ROI. And my best lineup was in 41st. So I wasn't that much farther behind. So my best lineup had Victor Hovland and Keegan Bradley and Sahith Thigala. So I had 3 of those core 4 players and Emiliano Grillo. So I had 4 of the pieces, right? I just needed that 5th piece. And unfortunately, I had a lot of Lucas Herbert this week, who I talked about. I loved. I would go right back to it. And a lot of Brendan Steele, who first round, I thought I was an absolute genius, right? He shot 6 under par, then +3, then -3, and then another +3, right? So he was just completely up and down, a roller coaster like no other with Brendan Steele. Still made plenty of birdies. You can see he made 16 birdies on the week. I mean, that's pretty respectable. Still put up right around 70 points, but that's what held me back from the top 10, right? You can see I'm only 30 spots off of that top 10 right there. And it was close because you can see even my 78th place lineup, right, had Hovland and Keegan Bradley there. Did actually have Corey Connors, who ended up finishing -6, right? So it's not like he had a horrible week for us at $9,000. But, kind of held us back from that top tier, right? Another Grillo, Keegan Bradley, Victor Hovland core there that I was building behind. And yet again, another Brendan Steele sighting, right? So it's just, he really screwed my lineups. In almost all of my top lineups, I either had a Brendan Steele or somebody like a Lucas Herbert. You can see in my 3rd lineup, actually didn't have either of them, but there was Munoz. He was in that similar 8K range where I had a lot of him this week. Luke List as well, right? Wasn't horrible, right? He scored 70 fantasy points, but the guys that were finishing up here in the top 10, so just to show those sort of lineups again, right? They had multiple 100+ point finishers, right? And then their lower tier guys, right, outside of this guy's lineup, right? Because he had Mito Pereira, but like 80-point scores, right? So just to give you an idea here, right? His worst was Steven Yeager, but the rest of them are all 80, 90+ point scorers. This guy, King Girth here. There's some really suspect names. That's all I got to say in this top 5. Between 4th and 5th place, we've got like the most suspect names I've seen for quite some time on DraftKings. That's like I say, hey, congrats on your money this week. What do you make? Like $2,000 to $1,000 yourself? Great. But your names are beyond suspect. Let's just say that. Let's go back to a few other lineups that I had here. Let's catch up on chat too, though. What's going on, Tom? He said, what's going on? You had lots of Keegan and Grillo. Yeah, me too, man. I had a lot of Keegan and Grillo. They were real bright spots for me. Obviously, a lot of Hovland. I thought he'd win. On Sunday, I had a weird feeling that he was going to fall apart, though. So I did fade him for Sunday Showdown, made that quite obvious. But yeah, man, it was a pretty decent week. If Hovland would have won, and Fowler may have like shot 2 or 3 over, on the round 4 rather than something like even par, I probably have a much better chance of taking stuff down. But hey, is what it is. Glad to see that you had a bunch of Griot and Keegan. And you said Herbert made you 1K on Sunday Showdown. Yeah, he played well there on Sunday. I had plenty of them in my lineups. My entire strategy for Sunday Showdown was take the chasers, right? Fade Hovland, fade Keegan, which I'd say that's a neutral play, right? He wasn't really helping you in Showdown on Sunday, but he also didn't hurt you because of the placement points that he got. It was just fade the top of the board and then play the chasers, and it worked out pretty well. So yeah, glad you played Herbert there, right? You can forgive him now, right? So if you played him for 4-round stuff and then you got him there in Sunday Showdown, you're like, screw it, whatever, right? He got me my money back or whatnot. So love to see it. And he said, love him forever. Exactly, right? So like he could have screwed you for your 4-round stuff and then helped you out on Sunday Showdown. That's always nice to see. Let's hop back into these lineups, though, give you an idea of kind of what my top builds look like, and then we'll actually hop into my player pool and exposure, which is really where we're going to dive deep into like some of the game theory decisions and where projections were right or wrong. I think that's the main thing here is I have a really good pulse on ownership, and there were 4 or 5 spots last week that I was drastically wrong on. And it's things that I want to bring up first off from a transparency perspective, but second off, even more importantly, why that happened, because I have my theories on it. So number 151, my third best lineup, it had Cam Davis, very average play. Same thing with Munoz at 366. This lineup had a ton of potential, but look at this. Aaron Rye over the weekend shot even and then -1. Just he couldn't get anything going, even though he made a bunch of birdies, right? He had 15 birdies and an eagle on the week. JJ Spawn, he was kind of like the up and down sort of play where, he had 2 decent rounds in rounds 2 and 4, but couldn't keep it all together. Just we were a lot closer this week than I think the results show, right? Because I lost $200. And I think a lot of people out there would kind of like kick themselves for that, right? And that's kind of why I want to do these streams and talk through this, guys. That's not a loss when it comes to DFS, right? When you first start and, you lock, right? And you can see the rake out there. This is actually higher than the rake, right? So we're technically at a plus EV when you look at it from that perspective. That's not going to be good enough for me, though, right? I'm going to be a long-term winner in terms of actual ROI, overcoming that rake. That's how you can be a professional and play DFS, right? If you can't overcome the rake, then you're not a professional. I wouldn't recommend it, at least, because you're just going to be donating money at that point. Again, we were like one player off of having a top 5 to top 10 lineup where you're spiking all of that ROI, right? Where every single lineup up there in the top 5 to 10 is like 3x your entries there on one entry, right? Like 5, well, I guess that's not the case. With 5th place, like $1,000. That's a little bit over my entries right there, right? 4th place, that's when you're starting to get like 3x your ROI, that sort of thing. If you're playing at these large field GPPs, you have to be okay with making this sort of ROI back, even on a good week. You have to be okay, because that's how the pricing, and that's how the payout structure is meant to be, right? Those top 5 to top 10 finishers are taking home a massive portion of the pie. And unless you're taking that portion of the pie home, you're going to be pretty hungry at the end of the night. That's what I have to say about that. And if you don't have that sort of mindset, then you shouldn't be playing these tournaments. That's probably the main thing I want to hone on here is your perspective, right? You should be going into this understanding that you're not going to win in this contest very often, but when you do win, you may win $25,000, or even for second place, you may win $10,000, which I don't want to say it's life-changing money. It can be for people in certain situations. We get the point. That's what people are going after. That's the hook out there, trying to get people to reel them in, right? Are these $25,000 and $10,000 payouts? For me, I have a large enough bankroll, especially with what I'm funneling in for NBA now. The NBA starts tomorrow night. So, and that's my big money maker when it comes to DFS, where I can take swings of minus $200 a week when it comes to my GPPs. It's a very small portion of the bankroll that I'm playing across all of my sites. And for some people out there, that might not be the case, right? You may have like a couple $1,000s in your DraftKings bankroll. And if you're playing in this $5, 150 max, $200 losses against a $2,000 bankroll is 10%. That's a very, very sizable portion of your bankroll, right? You shouldn't be taking 10% swings week in and week out, right? So whatever that is for you, if you're somebody that has, let's say, a $2,000 bankroll, you should probably be playing the 50-cent GPP, right? Not the $5 GPP, because then you're taking $20, $25 losses, right? And it's very comparable to the situation that I'm in when it comes to DFS, right? It's like, if you're the person out there with a couple grand bankroll, right, you should probably be playing the smaller contest. That's just to give you an idea, right? I play very small percentages of my bankroll every single week, just to really help with perspective, right? Because let's think this through, because it's not just about like what you're willing to lose, enjoying DFS, all that sort of thing. it makes you play differently. And I really hate that I'm giving this up. I think this is maybe my biggest edge when it comes to DFS. I'm not kidding. So probably going to be all ears for this. People that win at DFS are willing to lose. They have no attachments to the money that they're entering into contests. Min cashing for the best GPP players in the world is a loss. Going out there and getting your $5 entry to return $7.50 does nothing for large field GPP players. So when I go out there and I win $522 back, that means nothing to me, right? That's just money I guess I get to use for next week, right? But when I enter those $750, I almost look at it like that's just being thrown into the wind. You have to be willing to take chances in large field GPPs, or you're going to act way too conservatively. If you're worried about min cashing, trying to just slightly get ROI in these large field GPPs, you're going to be paying the rake, because what that's going to do is it's going to make you not make any sort of risk. And we know you have to take a risk to take down these GPPs. I mean, Ryo Hisatune, you had to take a big old risk to play him this week. Even Ricky Fowler, I wasn't willing to take that risk. I didn't have the balls to the table to go out there and play Ricky Fowler this week, right? I mean, he's looked like a complete shit for the last year. I mean, where did you think that top 5 finish was going to come from? He nearly won the damn golf tournament too, right? These sort of decisions aren't the type of decisions that you can make if you're worried about min cashing in large field GPPs. That is the edge when it comes to these contests. You have to understand that a lot of the content, well, I shouldn't say a lot, 99% of the entries that you're entering into these contests aren't going to get it done. Probably even higher rates, 99.99999, probably like 5 or 6 nines after that. Percent of lineups that you're entering into these contests are not going to be the nuts. You have to accept that, right? Because if you're going to go out there and try to build these perfect lineups that aren't doing anything with any sort of creativity, you're going to be paying the rake every single week. That's my spiel on that. That is probably the most important thing I could teach any of you out there, is not to play scared. You can't go out there and play like somebody that needs to min cash this week, because the fact of the matter is, if you min cashing is that important, then you probably shouldn't be playing DFS or betting to begin with, right? That's just a little bit of a self-check right there, right? If you're in that situation, you probably don't have the extra expenditure or the extra bankroll to be playing this sort of thing, right? And if you want to continue playing it, then scale it back. That's just the best advice I could give you, because if you do so, you'll be able to play with a clearer mind and go after some of these outlier outcomes that you have to, particularly not just for golf, right? But if you're playing showdown for NFL, right? If you go out there and you just try to go after median projection, enter like the cash builds into large field GPPs, you're going to pay the rake, right? Because they have like 16, 18% rakes over there from time to time. And especially for some of like those milli makers, 500K first sort of contest, it's crazy rake. That's just how they farm money out of people out there that don't understand the sort of game that they're in. So that's my thoughts on that. Let's hop over to the player pool side now. I probably already shared a little bit too much, to be honest. That is literally the biggest edge I think that there is in DFS, are people playing scared. And you can leverage that, because every single week, these super chalky players are the guys that we know people that are scared are going to play. This week, that was Sungjae Im. Sungjae Im, people that thought, oh, I'm scared Sungjae just going to have to finish in the top 5, right? Played him, and he was like 32% owned, ridiculously high owned, even higher owned than I thought he'd be, that sort of thing. When people play scared, you end up playing Sungjae last week. That's kind of the idea that I'm going off of right here. And we'll talk through all of the players here to kind of give you an idea. Let's see what's going on. Sack, you got a comment. You said, man, I agree 100%. You keep your DK bankroll in there till you win something big. That's kind of the idea, right? And a lot of my 50-50 and like trying to grind out ROI happens elsewhere. I have a lot of fun with Draftkings. It's the biggest platform, so that's why I do a lot of content for it. But the top 20 market is where I make a lot of my money when it comes to golf DFS. Outright betting helps me quite a bit when it comes to outrights. You know, last few weeks we've hit a few. You know, Keegan Bradley hit the week before that with a Tom Kim. But when it comes to playing DFS and trying to go after like those big bucks, right? Like you have to have that mindset. If you don't, you're going to be the ones paying us long term, right? Because when we end up spiking, it's going to be when you won 50 max into that contest and hardly min cash, right? And you end up paying us out that 100 grand payout that we're looking for, right? So yeah, glad to see that you're on board. I figured you would be, Sack. You kind of have that mindset. I've seen that with some of your builds. Like, you know, you go for broke, right? You're not out there trying to play like the median cash build. Sometimes I think you're a little bit crazy about it, Sack. You're a little bit more daring than I'd be, but hey, it makes sense. Zach says, you played Hayden Buckley last week and took the balls to mix him in there with Xander, Thigala, and Neesmith. Sounds like he had a pretty decent week because a lot of those top lineups had Hayden Buckley and Neesmith in them. So maybe not Neesmith so much. There was a lot of Hayden Buckley up there, though. So good call on you, Zach. It's pretty solid. Let's talk through what I ended up doing, though. So I have this sorted by price. We're just going to go through the entire player pool and kind of talk through some of the notables here. So let's look at the ownership up top. That's always something that I like to look at. So we had Cam Young slightly under projected. He came in 24.78 in terms of his ownership. I had him at 19.8. So clearly people love playing Cam Young. I think some of it came down to the price. People just were really easily able to fit him into lineups at $9,300, especially if you started with a Sanjay M, right? If you went Sanjay and then you finished up with a Cameron Young here in the 9K range, you still had a lot of salary to take some of these chalky plays in the middle, like a Tom Hoagie. Emito Pereira was extremely chalky, right? Came in only 18%. So we had him projected at 22. I mean, 18 was still way chalkier than everyone else in this range, but it was only 3% higher than a Sepp Straka, right? So a lot of times when ownership projections are projecting for some mega chalk, we have to almost account for that to bounce back, right? Where people are going to go, oh, I can't play that sort of chalk anymore. And he'll actually go down in ownership. And guys down here like a Sepp Straka, right, who's 13% owned, people will compare him to Emito and go, oh, he's projected to be almost like half his owned, right? And then that gap, which was close to an 8% gap to begin, goes down to something closer to 2.53%, right? Like it ended up actually being, right? So those large gaps in ownership a lot of times get corrected for late into a Wednesday evening as people start to account for ownership projections out there, right? Start playing the ownership game. You've had a lot stronger fields. I would say just people are getting better at playing DFS in general. So they're starting to account for these sort of things. So, when I'm going through my projections, sometimes I'm going to have to almost account for the reaction to my ownership, right? Because if there was a 30.9% ownership projection on Xander and he came in 24%, it's almost like people reacted to that, right? Where they saw the ownership numbers there and were like, oh, I had to fade it. Now, I actually went and ate it, right? I was like, I'm going to play 40%. And I was like, if he's 30% and I get 40 and I'm 1.5x the field, so be it. He came in a little bit lower owned and we got nearly 2x the field. So that was pretty ideal for us. You can see Hideki was super low owned. Colin Morikawa low owned like we thought he would be. Sanjay a little bit higher owned than people thought he would be. He was that piece of chalk that people just could not get off of, right? So like, how I mentioned playing scared, right? You look at his game log over the last 4 to 5 events and you're like, oh, I have to play Sanjay M. Right? He's finishing in the top 10 like every single time. That means he has to finish top 10 again, right? Wrong, right? Golf's a volatile sport. Sometimes you go on to those streaks because you're just on a heater, right? And heaters come to an end. If you've ever been playing blackjack before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just these sort of situations, right? It's not a massive difference in ownership, right? We were within 10% on that. Well, I guess it depends on how you're classifying that, right? We are decently close on most of these projections. The ones to note, though, right, are Xander was lower owned than people thought he would be, and Sanjay was higher owned than people thought he would be. Which, again, it actually might be the price too. So, of course, Xander was just more expensive. Sanjay M was a lot easier to fit into lineup, so I think that might have had a lot to do with it. But yeah, that's the ownership up top was decent. It wasn't perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But it gave us a general idea of what to do there. Fading Sanjay was a great idea. At 28%, I was going to fade him, but especially if he was 32%, that made a lot of sense to me. I faded Tom Kim. I was worried about a little bit of fatigue there. Sanjay M and Tom Kim were coming over from America. They only had a day and a half of practice or even time in Japan to get ready for the event. And of course, half that day had to have been sleep, right? So they had, 1 full day of practice between the two of them to go out there and get prepared. I think that had a large effect. I faded Cam Young because of his driving accuracy, and that really was a thing. He was going out there having solid birdie production, but he was just completely derailing himself every about 4 to 5 holes. He'd hit it into the trees. He'd have to pitch out. He was saving a few of them for par, but a lot of bogeys and a few double bogeys on the card. And that's all she wrote, right? When you're $9,300, you're going to have to go out there and have a near ceiling performance. So I was glad I faded him there. In terms of core picks that paid off, Victor Hovland was the one that paid off the most, where he scored 106.5 points. He came in 17% owned, right around our projection. I saw a few other people projecting him for closer to like 20 to 25%. What you got to realize is that the slapdicks out there will not play somebody that has a bad game log. If they look at his recent finishes and there's not top 5s and top 10s, they ain't going to play him. That's just how a lot of those slappies play, right? They don't do research. They might not even know who Victor Hovland is, but what they do know is that they have the DraftKings app. They can click on their game log and see how they've played over the last 4 to 5 events. And even worse, if they haven't played much of late, they're even less likely to play him. So he came in slightly higher than our projection, but I was pretty comfortable keeping him in the teen range there, which gave us a ton of leverage. In fact, our highest leveraged player, I should say, on the entire slate was Victor Hovland. And of course, that was a pretty solid decision with all that hindsight now. We only had 15% leverage on Hideki, Colin, and Xander, but that's typically the metric that I'm looking for. I know a lot of people out there will talk about trying to get to 2x leverage. For me, getting closer to 15% on these guys up top is what I'm looking for, because if somebody's going to be 30% owned, I'm not comfortable personally with playing them in 60, 70% of my lineups. I'll lock a player from time to time. I've done it like 3 times in my DFS career, and every time I've done it, the player has won. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't do it very often, but when I do it, it's usually for good reason. I'm not willing to do that with 99.99% of situations. That's just something that I'm not going to be willing to go out there and tout. So yeah, getting 15% leverage to some of these guys up top is enough for me. Even if it only ends up being like 1.5x the field, so be it. I'm not going to spread myself out that thin, particularly because I'm playing 150 lineups. If I was playing 20 lineups, then fine. Right? I could see myself maybe locking somebody in, trying to get at least 2x leverage to the field on everybody that I'm taking. But with 150 lineups, am I able to cover a good amount of combinations with my 150 lineups because I'm aggressive with almost every player that I'm taking. Even the guys at the bottom of my player pool when it comes to exposure are at least 5 to 7%. Right? I'm not taking players in like 2% of my lineups. So 150 lineups, even if I'm not getting a ton of actual quote unquote leverage to the field, this 2x number that somebody just made up and told us that we have to abide by, I don't think that's the end all be all. By the way, I don't know who ended up starting that whole theory out there, getting 2x the field. If you look at most of the top DFS players, like an Awesemo, if you look at Toe Tag and Tambo's exposure, all of those sort of players that are constantly shipping GPPs and whatnot, they almost never are on this 2x roll. Almost all of them are in a hybrid approach where sometimes it's 2x the field, sometimes it's more than 2x the field, like what I had with a Victor Hovland, and sometimes they're willing to take stands under on players, right? So let's say Sanjay was 30% owned, sometimes they'll take him in 15%. This is why you have to do lineup study, and something I'm going to start to include in this sort of live stream is looking at other people's exposure, as particularly ones that were successful that week, to get an idea of what they were building with, right? So it's something I got to find a way to get everyone else's exposure. I'm going to actually reach out to a few creators to see if I can get their exposure, if I can reach out to them on Twitter, that sort of thing. If they end up shipping a contest or getting close to the top, just to kind of bring you guys some of that knowledge, right? So I don't know. I'm trying to dispel some of the GPP myths out there about ownership, about getting exposure to players. I think a lot of the advice out there is very niche, very specific to certain situations. That 2x roll, by the way, there's zero chance that originated in golf. That was out way before DFS golf was a thing, right? They were talking about this 7-8 years ago. They had this whole 2x roll, and it was mostly people that are playing NFL DFS. To try and take that same role and say that it has to apply to golf is ridiculous, right? That's the pushback that I'd give to the people out there that are these DFS traditionalists that'll tell me, oh, what are you talking about? You have to get 2x to the field. Is those rules were created for niche sports that have been around for a long time. DFS golf is something that is ever evolving, something that we're still getting a grasp on. I mean, when the GPP winning lineups only have 5 players that are even near optimal players in it, we can clearly do better, right? In other sports, especially like for Showdown NFL, now it's a lot less players to choose from. It's a lot easier to get to those lineups, right? There's that caveat, but they're entering the near optimal build almost every single time, right? So like we can get better as a community. Like I think people need to realize that. And to say that these roles out there for building are like the end all be all and that we should just have to follow them because they've been around for such a long time is ridiculous. And sure, if you want to continue to do that and pay the rate, that's fine, right? But for us more creative thinkers, probably the best way to put it, we're probably going to have the more long-term success. That's my feel in the situation. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on, see if there's anything down there. We have a Sack down there. We went through that already. Sweet. And by the way, Hayden Buckley, we're going to talk about him. He had a really good week ball striking, which wasn't really what he was doing coming in. So good on Hayden Buckley there. Let's talk about this 8K range now, which is really where you made your money. I talked about going into the week that I thought this was going to be your pivotal range where you either won or lost the GPP, and that was certainly the case. Keegan Bradley was the winner here. You absolutely had to have him to have a top 10% lineup because he was still getting ownership, right? He came in 11.5%, just slightly lower than where I had him projected at. I took him in 25% of lineups, which meant that I was over 2x the field there, which is great, particularly because he won the golf tournament, right? You always want to get over 2x the field on the winner if you can, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I played a good amount of them. In terms of Corey Connors, I got 2x the field there too. I played him in 20% of lineups. I projected him for 11.7. So, if I was playing by that 2x roll, right, I probably would have played 25% of Corey Connors. But that, again, that's not something that I live and die by. Just not at all, actually. Here with Terrell Hatton, played him in 20% of lineups. He actually came in higher owned than I expected. I think because a few people touted him, he came in higher owned, which is just going to happen from time to time. I don't know, still decent play. He could have gone out there and had a good week. So I'm not too worried about only playing 20%. I mean, he wasn't somebody I was like running to the window to play. Same thing with Tommy Fleetwood. Now, he came in pretty much at that same exact ownership level. Both of them I thought were decent plays, just guys that I thought were maybe a little bit too expensive. And you didn't have to have either one, right? So it was a very neutral play overall. Let's move on to the bottom of the 8K. I mean, Sahith Theegala was a near optimal play. I played 25%, which was a whole nearly 4x what I had him projected at. So like, this is to give you another example, right? There's some guys that I'm very aggressive about, right? Like a Sahith Theegala. Give you an example of a guy I was extremely aggressive about that didn't work out at all was Lucas Herbert, right? I played 18%, but I had him projected for 6%. So I was going for 3x leverage there and struck out like a mofo, right? But sometimes when you do it with a Sahith Theegala, right, you end up getting massive leverage to a player and nearly 3x the field on somebody who's a nuts play, right? So that's why I hate this whole like 2x value thing, right? Where people are going out there and it's saying that you have to play all the players with the same amount of leverage. That's just BS. It's not true. If you like players more than others, then take larger stands on them, right? And if you like players a little bit less than other players, then feel free to go ahead and take under the field stances on them. That's okay. There's no set rule book to playing DFS. I really want to make that clear. Zach says, I like to play 2 highly owned players and then play 1 to 2 6 to 7K players. Yeah, that's a good way to differentiate yourself, especially if the 6 to 7K guys are low owned. And you said you hate playing so much of the highly projected players except in cash games. Yeah, that's the idea, right? Because if you did that this week, you would have played a ton of Sun JM, who was one of the worst plays up top, right? Hideki and Morikawa didn't score as many points as Sanjay, but he wasn't anywhere close to an optimal lineup. A lot of people played Cam Young based on projection, right? And he ended up, scored 60 fantasy points. It was pretty much the same thing as a Tommy Fleetwood there. And who else was going to be mega chalk? Yeah, Tom Hoagie, because of his form, right? And Tom Hoagie had an okay week, right? He's actually in some of those top builds, right? So sometimes the chalk pays off, but you can see none of those guys were the nuts play, right? Guys that you absolutely had to have this week. So yeah, man, I think that's a smart strategy to implement. More often than not, the chalk's not going to hit. Sometimes it will. And, sometimes I eat the chalk, right? I've been somebody on this channel that said that before. Sometimes I'm willing to play that highest owned player on the slate, but I'm not going to lock them in very often. Usually I'm just going to play them in half my lineups and move on, right? Win the GPP elsewhere, right? Not really worry about that guy up top, kind of punt that position, get just slight leverage to the field, kind of like you're saying, like take those 1 to 2 chalky players up top and then win the GPP elsewhere. Like you don't have to win the GPP in the 10K range. Like this week, you didn't really win the GPP in the 10K range, right? Like none of these guys went off. Like I was kind of surprised to see Xander in some of those top lineups because it's not like he had a good week, right? He only scored like 86 fantasy points, which is, it's far from a good week. That's very average for somebody in the 10K range. You won it down low. You won it by taking Keegan Bradley, right? You won it by taking Ricky Fowler, for example, this week. That I think you're focusing on the right thing, man, for sure. In terms of this top of the 7K range, bottom of the 8K, I loved myself some Munoz. I played 2x the field. Did not really work out. He had a very average week. Scott Stallings, another average week. I ended up taking 3x the field where I thought he'd be projected. Now, he came in actually way higher owned than I expected. So you can see this is one of the worst ownership projections I had this week. I thought he'd be single digit, and he came in nearly 12%. So I was about 2x off there. So if I would have gone with my 2x roll, right, I would have been right at the field. So I played what I thought he was worth, which was 20% ownership, and was able to get 2x the actual field there. So that's why I don't live by this 2x roll, because sometimes everybody agrees with you and goes, oh, Scott Stallings 6%. I have to get leverage there. I'm going to play 12 to 15%. Well, it seems like everybody did that, right? And that's why he was right around 12% ownership. So taking 20%, obviously in hindsight, looks even better, but it's something that I'm not afraid to do at all when it comes to these large field contests. Sorry, I didn't mean to move that around there, boys. The new monitor here is takes a little bit getting used to. Davis Riley was dog shit. I expected that. I think I even said during my core picks video that like there's a really good chance he finishes almost dead last. And if they had a cut here, he probably would have missed the cut, right? I think that's what I said about it. Yeah, that's about what happened. I played 25%. I got 2.5x leverage. I was feeling real good about it going in, and then he flamed out, which, again, not that surprising. He's a volatile player. I will go right back to it. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment in playing Davis Riley, but he's just got too much upside for me. I can't avoid it. Seb Straka played okay, but we faded him, which ended up being pretty decent. Neesmith, Zach's guy out there. I know you love Matthew Neesmith, Zach. He ended up having an okay week, right? 87 points. It didn't hurt you, particularly at $7,800. You can see a few lineups up there had him. Lucas Herbert, though, I just thought had more upside. You know, he was coming in half his owned. You can see in terms of actual ownership, came in half his owned to Straka, not nearly half his owned as a Matthew Neesmith. So people kind of were keen to this pivot here. You know, saw Lucas Herbert's track record at easy golf tournaments, at international golf tournaments, because, you know, he's a DP World Tour member for all that time, had wins over there, won at the Bermuda Championship in his first ever rookie season, and was now in Japan, right? So if anybody was going to play well internationally, it was probably Lucas Herbert. So in hindsight, like I have no issues with how much leverage I got there, right? I played 18%, which was 3x where I thought he'd come in at, and I'd do it again. He's a great player and somebody who's been good overseas. A few other 7K options. Hughes played okay, but he was a good fade. Kurt Kitayama was also a good fade at $7,000. Actually, it's crazy. I ended up accidentally putting him in like 4 lineups this week. And it was a couple top lineups too that ended up accidentally having Kurt Kitayama. And that was completely unintentional. So that kind of sucked for us. Played him a bunch of showdown, though, and he also kind of sucked. Brendan Steele, we played well over the field on. He came in 4%, which was actually lower than I had him projected for. And I played 18%. So I had over 4x leverage on him. So that was okay. I wish I would have played Fowler instead, though. You can see Ricky Fowler. I projected him at 4.4. He came in a little bit higher owned. There's always that little bit of a crowd factor, I should say, like just popularity factor when it comes to Ricky Fowler, where he gets higher ownership just because people like playing Ricky Fowler, kind of rooting for him. You absolutely had to have him in this range. I mean, look at outside of Andrew Putnam, right? You had to have a Putnam or a Ricky Fowler, or ideally both of them in the same lineup to go out there and spike the nuts this week. So, you know, I didn't play either. I didn't have Andrew Putnam or Ricky Fowler. This is really the only reason we didn't cash out, because otherwise we made almost all of the right decisions, right? We faded all of those high-owned players that ended up kind of just having average performances, but we didn't hit the nuts with these random guys that spiked. Now, Andrew Putnam's not a random guy that spiked. He's been playing really good golf for quite some time now, and granted, I don't think it's going to continue. This is the whole idea with Andrew Putnam. I'm going to continue to fade him because he's not that guy. I've seen him play for quite some time, like 4 or 5 years at this point. He's just not that guy, unless he's completely just figured something out of nowhere, which I don't know. I'm usually somebody to question that. Usually guys, you know, they'll spike for like a month, maybe a month and a half at a time, and then completely fall off. I'm just thinking it's going to happen any week now for Andrew Putnam. So, you know, no hate to him. I hope he has a great season, proves me wrong. But most of the time, that's what happens, right? These guys go out there, they spike for a few weeks, and then they fall off the face of the planet. Ricky Fowler, though, you know, he's starting to show a little bit. You've seen the ball striking trending in the right direction for a few weeks. Just there was no way to tell he was going to putt like he did this week. He was making everything, bunch of those 10 to 15 footers like we're used to seeing Ricky Fowler make. And I've been a sucker for playing him in the past. I played him last year at the CJ Cup, where he had a really good performance over there in Las Vegas. Obviously didn't play him this time around. It's just so hard to predict. You know, if you're going to take somebody like Ricky Fowler and hope that he bounces back, you're going to lose a lot more money long-term than you're going to win on him, right? And unless you won the GPP this week playing Ricky Fowler, you're probably still not a net positive on playing him. Like, actually, that's not a probably. You're 1,000% not in the positive. for playing Ricky Fowler, right? You pretty much had to win the GPP this week to have any semblance of getting your money back from playing him. So I'm okay with fading him, right? If I'm going to get screwed by it one time out of the year because he goes out there and has a spike performance, then so be it. I'm just going to have to live with that, right? I love the guy to death. He's part of the mullet gang back in the day, but just you can't see that coming. That's all I got to say about that. Can you explain the 2x, 3x idea for you? Yes, absolutely. So there's this idea around the industry that if you see somebody's projected ownership in your personal pool, you should play 2x that. There's a couple reasons that people say that, and a couple reasons I think it's completely wrong. So I'll give you both sides of the argument. The sides for it are that you want to get leverage to the field, right? You want to have a lot more than everybody else so that when they succeed, you also get a benefit in your lineups, right? Because if you were to play exactly at the field, you're probably losing money because of the rate, right? You're not really getting a plus or a minus for having them. That's the idea. I'm not saying I agree with it. That's the idea. On the flip side, though, what I really hate about it are a few things. One, ownership projections aren't always right. We've gone through a few examples where mine were drastically off this week, and how in a few cases I actually lucked out, right? I played way over the field on somebody and still got leverage to them. In a few instances where it really hurt us, right? Ownership projections are never going to be perfect. I don't care how good you are at them. So trying to say that you have to play 2x the field of every number, regardless of how much you like them or not, is ridiculous, right? Because you're almost never going to get actually 2x the field, right? It's just what you think 2x the field is going to be. So what I think you should be doing is maybe using 2x as a guide marker. Like maybe what you do for like an average GPP play is play them at 2x the field. And for players who maybe like a little bit less than others, like maybe you have them in your pool just in case they play well, you play them at like 1.5x the field. And for guys that you're really convicted about, that you really like this week, maybe you play them in 2.5 to 4x the field, right? That's what I do personally. If I see somebody that I really like, that I think is being really low owned, and that I really want to try and take advantage of if they play well, I'll play 4 or 5x the field. I will, especially if they're like 5%, right? It's easy to do so. You put them in 20, 25% of your lineups. Whereas if somebody is mega chalk, like 20%, right? It's a lot harder to try and take 3x to the field on a player. So it's kind of dependent on the range. But the whole thing I'm trying to point out here is that to say that you have to take 2x on a player, no matter what, is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's archaic thinking. It's like trying to make fire using a flint and steel at this point, right? It's like we've come past that, right? We've realized that everything's not black and white in DFS, right? You can be a little bit more hybrid with our approach, or we're not all morons, right? We're able to think for ourselves. If we really like somebody, we play them a little bit more, right? If we don't like them as much, maybe we don't play them at 2x the field, right? Like, I swear some of these touts out there treat us like we're morons, like we're not able to think for ourselves and go out there and adapt to our situation. That's the thing I'm trying to point out, is that I feel like a lot of people out there just, I don't know if they're not bright themselves or if they just don't understand that you don't have to have like this rule book in front of you and be like, oh, I'm going to play DFS by this little rule book I have, right? Because the best players in the world don't play by that rule book. They have their own set of rules that they play by, and maybe that's why they're the best players. And you said Neesmith has been on a heater. Yeah, bro. His ball striking. Actually, I want to bring this up. Now, this is not accounting for this week, right, guys? These were my projections from last week. Let's look at Neesmith's ball striking numbers. Look at this. He's gaining in both categories, right? 0.28, 0.24. But even over the last 50 measured rounds, I'm pretty sure it holds up. Let's see. Where's good old Matty Neesmith? Yeah, even more so, actually. Over his last 50 rounds, he's gaining even more significantly with all of his ball striking categories. Yeah, you love to see that. And right, look at this. He's even a neutral with the other two, right? He's right around a neutral off around the green, slight positive with the putter. Maybe he's just a better player now, man. Maybe I'm not giving him the respect he deserves. I may actually have to give you a little bit of credence there. Let's move on, though. Let's go through the rest of this poll here, get an idea for where some of the ownership was at the bottom of the board. Svensson, I went right about 2x the field. That was about as standard as play as humanly possible. He came in within 0.1 of the ownership that I had him at. You can see the ownership in this range, outside of a few examples like a Matt Wallace who came in a little bit lower owned. It's pretty much spot on. I loved getting Detroit Merritt, but he didn't really do anything this week. I mean, I played him in 8%. So you can see I played him like 1.5x the field. But I thought if anything, he had a ceiling round in him out there. So I gave him a chance. Didn't work out, but I'm willing to go back there. In terms of 6K options, I didn't play a ton of them. I loved somebody like Hodges. I played over 1.5x the field. CT Pan, I played over 2x the field on. I thought he was a great play. Hodges kind of worked out, right? He scored 84 points. CT Pan, not so much, but I'd be willing to get back to both. Both were much higher upside plays than their peers and were right around the same amount of ownership. Now, Hayden Buckley was the one guy we really got wrong here, right? $6,800. I faded him. He actually came in lower owned than I expected and smashed. So that's about as worse a situation as you can get, right? Where I thought he'd be chalky and he wasn't really that chalky, right? He was only 2% more than Pan and he smashed. So like these are the things we need to learn from, right? Like when you're recapping a slate, it's great to pat yourself on the back for a few things, right? But sometimes you gotta dig into yourself a little bit, right? Go, what did I do wrong there? Thing is, he's a 6K range golfer, right? So he's never really going to be 12% owned. Maybe that was my mistake there, thinking that he might get a little bit more steam. But also, it's Hayden Buckley, right? Like, it's not like his recent form was like jumping out at us. Like, we were like, oh, I have to play this guy. Sure, he was gaining a bunch off the tee, but he was losing on approach, losing around the green in a slight game with the putter. So there was just a little bit, I don't know, I guess people touting him may have kind of like swayed me in that direction where I was like, oh, if everyone's touting this guy, everyone's going to play him. And it's a small portion of the actual DFS pool that is watching, a video like this or watching content out there to get all of their picks. So yeah, that was a mistake. And one that kind of cost us a little bit, I have to admit. So, hey, we're going to learn from it. We'll get better going forward. Takumi Kanaya at 6,600 I played. He was okay. But again, you needed Hayden Buckley, right? You got him by 40 points there. Ches Reavie was complete and utter dog shit. Nothing else to say there. He was about as bad as it's going to get. Other than over the weekend, he had a few decent rounds. Hiroshi Awada looked great after the first round, was just way too volatile with his bogey production over the weekend. And you could say I played 7x the field, right? So like this whole 2x roll, I would have only played 2% of Awada, which is 3 lineups out of 150. Like, do you really think I'm going to get the nuts combination by playing 3 lineups and just hoping that the other 5 spots in one of those 3 combinations is what I need? Like, that's not nowhere near enough lineups, right? So I played 7%, which for me is, I believe, 11 lineups. It's either 10 or 11, right? Depends on whether it goes to the upper or the lower bound there. But that gives you a lot more chance to go out there and hit the nuts, right? So if Awada would have been somebody that you had to have this week, kind of like where's a Hitsuwani there? It was $6,400. Hitsuwani, $6,400, right? He scored 76 points. You could have also taken, I guess it seems like Kita Nakajima could have also been somebody that you took for this sort of play down here. I mean, what? They're like 1%, all 1% owned, right? Kita Nakajima came in a little bit higher at 2%. Let's see. What did Hitsuwani come in? 1.1% owned. These sort of players, if you're going to take them in 3 lineups, you have no shot at hitting the nuts on that. Like, you're just going to have to completely luck sack your way into that. The lowest I really take on these guys, you can see 5% on a Hoshino. Look, I took 7% on an Awada, because if they end up playing well, I wanted to take advantage of it. You see up here, Ches Reavie, I played 7% out. That was way over the field on him. I was well over 2x on Takumi Kanaya. You can see Lee Hodges, I was almost 2.5x the field on him. CT Pan, again, 2.5x. These sort of plays down here, I'd rather take aggressive stances on than take 2% of Nakajima, 2% here, 2% here, 2, so on and so forth. Because even if you get the guys that hit, they have to be in the right combination. And I guess people don't realize that like 3 lineups is nowhere enough to cover the other 5 spots. Like even 10 to 15 lineups isn't enough to cover the other few spots. Most of the time you're going to miss out, right, on catching the right combination there. That I'm always way more aggressive down low than I think a lot of other DFS players are. And that's for better or worse, right? It makes my min caching a little bit harder to come by. But at the same time, when I have a really good week down low, I'm able to leverage it 5-10 times more than everybody else in the field. And that's really what I'm looking for there. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. You said, man, I truly love how you admit you were wrong on a player. Yeah, dude, it's crazy to me that people out there don't do that, right? Like, especially when looking at their projections, like they'll put out projected ownership and then ignore it like it never happened again, right? And they'll be like drastically off on like the entire field and never admit it to their people, right? Like, for me, a 5% little difference here, is pretty big, right? Like I take that pretty seriously. Now, does it change your look on the slate, how you play it? Not really, right? It's a very minimal change when it comes to that. But it's important to note. It's important to, try and look at, because how are we going to get better if we don't, right? How are you going to try and improve on your past results if you're not really to try and look at, what you did wrong for the slate before? So, yeah, that's the idea there, boss. And you said, You said Buckley, saw you faded him and almost didn't play him, but you still played him. Dude, that's the idea, man. You should be playing anybody that you have a gut feeling on, right? Like if you think that they're going to be a good play, even if they're getting ownership, then don't jump off them, right? The player pool I put out is just to give you perspective, right? It's not like to go out there, copy it, that sort of thing. It's to like, hey, this is who I like, right? It doesn't have to be who you like, but let's say you also like somebody that I like, then hey, all fire away, right? Let's say that you like somebody and I really don't like them, then maybe just take one extra look at it, right? Look at the stats, make sure that you really like them. And, like with the Hayden Buckley, if you do, then yeah, fire away, right? It worked out this week if you did. And he said, how do you get your ownership numbers for projected ownership? So a couple different ways. I look at the rest of the industry. I get an aggregated ownership number across 8 different sources of ownership. And then on top of that, I have an algorithm that adjusts it based on first off pricing, which is something that a lot of the other ownership people don't account for, is that people spend all of their salary, and almost always they either spend too much salary in their ownership projections or too little. So I do an adjustment on that. And then I also do something I call a sentiment adjustment. And I'm not going to give away the entire process, but based on how much somebody is touted around the industry, or based on how much people just like a certain player, they get artificial boost in ownership, up or down, right? So Patrick Reed, for example, always has a negative sentiment number. No matter how well he projects week to week, I'm always going to lower his ownership projection because he always comes in lower owned. On the flip side, right, you have players like a Jordan Spieth who will always come in higher owned than people project him to. Players like a Cameron Young now, right? He's becoming one of those household favorites. Those sort of players, you kind of got to account for week to week. Ricky Fowler, right? He came in 5.5% owned despite not being in that great of form. Those are the sort of things that I account for. It's complicated. It takes me quite some time. It's automated at this point, so it's not really something that I have to do too much work on. I just import projections, aggregate, and then I'm able to adjust the sentiment factor. That's the real thing that I have to do by hand, is absorbing a lot of content, right? Looking at a lot of other optimals around the industry to try to get an idea of who they're touting, who they think is going to be the best play from week to week, and then accounting for that. Because a lot of the other people in the industry aren't really doing all of that, right? They're not looking at the sentiment factor as much as I am. I think that's the main thing that I really have with ownership projections that a lot of other people don't, is I count for a lot of the psychology when it comes to DFS. Well, that is all I've got here, boys. We've gone live for almost an hour now, which, again, this is a brand new live stream, brand new series on the channel. We're going to get better with it as we go, but hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for this week than you did before. What we're going to do now, though, is talk about the CJ Cup for a few minutes, just talk about Congaree, which will be the home for this week, and then we're going to go through just maybe the type of skill set that should succeed, and some of the early betting numbers. There's a few that I think are a little bit juicy and might get steamed up at the end of the week. So first off, you have Congaree. I'm actually going to bring up a course map for you guys. It's probably the best way to do this, and talk through the skill set, because it's a very, very strange golf course. It's something that we had never seen before. We went there last year for the first time, and we all got it wrong. We all thought it was going to play a certain way in the industry. And I'd say by we's like people, including myself, that were putting out content, but also almost all the other creators thought it was going to play a little bit differently than it ended up playing. So I don't know if they have a overhead view here. I'm trying to find one. Give me a second, guys. If I can find it, it'll be really helpful. They do have one. Okay, sweet. Okay, let me share my screen, bring this up for you guys. So 1 second. And I'm going to do a whole course breakdown too, but I just want to give you guys an idea of what we're working with here. All righty. All right, here it is, boys. So this is Congaree Golf Club. It's in the middle of nowhere, Ridgeland, South Carolina. And the first time that we saw this, we saw 7,600 yards. We saw par 72, and we said, this is a bomber's track. Everyone in the industry, including myself, went, this has to be like DJ's course, because DJ was playing here last year, right? So everyone was like, oh, we got to play DJ here. It was all of the short hitters that played well. Literally the entire leaderboard was just all people that skedaddled it up the fairway. Just nobody that had any length, any whatsoever. Yet a lot of those longer players missed the cut. And what we didn't realize is that this course just runs like crazy. You hit the fairway, you get like 70 yards of rollout. Kevin Kisner is a member here. JT Poston is a member here. I don't think they'd be a member at a golf course that's meant for bombers. right? They won't. Neither of them are long off the tee. And that sort of effect was definitely noticed when we looked at the leaderboard, that's for sure. So you can see some longer par fives, right? Like 647, but that's not reachable for anybody out there. You can see 575 here, right? That's reachable in two. A few of them are like 580, but they're not easy either. They're by far the most difficult holes on the property. So like, just to give you an idea here, it's really dry. I mean, you can see it from the overhead view here, guys. I mean, look at this. It's freaking yellow out there. Like, it's not green like we typically see on these pro visualizers. It's literally yellow. Hole 2, 580, right? You got water in play on this golf course all over the place too. So you can see tee shots are a little bit tight. You have a lot of trees over here. But anytime you hit the fairways, it just rolls out forever. So this is set at a 300-yard drive. You could get it out there 330, 350 pretty easily and have like 240, 250 into this long par five. So it's not really all about distance as much as it is just about hitting fairways and hitting greens. It's a ball striking test. Putting here was extremely important. They have Bermuda. Actually, don't quote me on that. Again, I still have to do my research in my course breakdown, right? I don't want to give you guys any false information. They're either Bermuda or paspalum greens. For some reason, I feel like it's paspalum. Might be Bermuda, but either way, the putting was extremely important last year. A lot of the putting specialists were at the top of the board. 330, so a drivable par four here. 647, this is not reachable by anybody. I'm not even looking at it. 165 over water. This golf course it wasn't nearly the bomber fest that we thought it was going to be. It ended up being a lot more about precision than it was about power. And now we know that, right? It's the second time at this golf course, so we can adjust for it. And you can see, right? Like, if you're getting the rollout that I'm talking about, this course isn't about distance, right? There's not one hole here where it's difficult because of distance. Hole 9 could be, right? But you got to remember that you're getting all this extra rollout. So they have this set at a 320-yard drive. What you have to realize is they set these up for like you and me. This pro visualizer tool, sorry, it says pro visualizer, but this is meant for like people like you and me going out and looking at what our round would look like, because we could visualize it like a pro would, right? That's essentially what they're selling here. And I mean, you're going to have some guys that are getting out there like 350, 360 because of the extra rollout that you're getting on this hole, which leaves you 140 into the green. That's a wedge for most players on tour. That's really the golf course that we're dealing with. So you look at the scorecard yardage, you might think it's for bombers. It's not going to play that way. And so we're looking at, putting specialists, right? So if they're Bermuda greens, look at Bermuda specialists. If they're paspalum, look at paspalum. I should know this. I got to look this up now. 1 second, guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I got to look this up. It's not that hard to look at. Just bring up the BCSAA fact sheet real quick. And I'll give you guys some of the specifics. So 1 second, let me bring it up. It should be out by now, so I'll be able to share it for you guys. Yeah, we do. Sweet. All right, so 1 second. Let me share the screen again and bring it up. There we go. All right, so tournament fact sheet. They still have it listed at a super long yardage, right, which was kind of throwing everybody off. The greens are Bermuda. Okay. I knew they were either Bermuda or paspalum, and the whole golf course is Bermuda. So I don't know where I got paspalum from, but it's definitely Bermuda grass. The greens are about average in terms of their size. 6,000 to 7,000 is what we're used to seeing on tour. Massive fairways, a bunch of sand and waste areas. So that's a lot of the yellow that you were seeing on those overhead looks in between holes. A lot of that is sand, which is extremely difficult to hit out of. And I think that's also something that we didn't think about, is that we thought this was a bomber course because it looked wide open, right? There's not that many trees out there. What we didn't realize is that a lot of those natural areas were sand, had rocks in them, were extremely difficult to hit out of because they're natural areas, and were a huge, huge penalty for some of these players. So that's something that I think we have to look at. And hosted the Palmetto Championship that Garrick Higo won. Yeah, we know that. And the course, this is important. This is something that you didn't tell us last year. Okay, guys, the course is built to play firm and fast, like a sandbelt course in Australia. I couldn't have said it better myself, right? So like when you look at the distances and like some of the things from an overhead view, it doesn't give you that feel, right? We didn't know that going into last year, but now that we know this, we should be looking at some of the shorter players. So now what I'm going to do is bring up Draftkings. We'll look at the betting board here just to give you an idea of maybe some of the first looks. So Draftkings. It's CJ. I almost put a Palmetto Championship in there. It's definitely not the Palmetto anymore. That was a one-off event for us. Let's see. Does DraftKings not have it up yet? There we go. Perfect. That's for the 2022. Well, it's definitely not the 2022 version. Come on, DraftKings. You're posting the wrong odds now. I promise we'll get it up in a second, boys. I bet. All right, so let's take a look at this betting board real quick, get an idea for maybe some of the first clicks that we should take a look at. And let's see what we've got working with. So your leader, or should say your leader in the clubhouse this early in the week is Rory McIlroy, plus 650, zero chance I'd bet that. He could win this event. Don't get me wrong, but 6.5 to 1 odds is just not going to get a click from me. You have a lot of the bombers at the top. I think like Matt Fitzpatrick, right, is like the perfect guy to win here. It's a firm and fast golf course, right? US Open type of conditions. He's 18 to 1. He's like where you're starting to get some sort of value. I mean, in this like 20 to 30 to 1 range, you're also going to find a little bit of value like a Tom Kim. This is the perfect golf course for him, right? He's getting extra rollout. He hits it straight. He's precise off the tee. 28 to 1 in this strong of a field, though, probably isn't juicy enough of a number to me. But it's those sort of players like Shane Lowry, 22 to 1. That's just way too low of a number for me. I need like 30 to 1 on Shane Lowry, if not 35 to 1 to be feeling, willing to go out there and hit that sort of thing. But it's those kind of players. Let's see. Do we get any value down here? You see, like, yeah, the numbers just aren't all that juicy up top. I don't love a lot of those first clicks. It's a smaller field, so it has a lot to do with it. I mean, like Tommy Fleetwood at 80 to 1. Yeah, like I think I'm going to have to bet that. I mean, I can't bet on GK. I got to see what I have access to on my end. But Tommy Fleetwood at 80 to 1 would make a whole lot of sense. Seamus Power at 100 to 1, like one of these short, firm, and fast golf courses. Well, I shouldn't say short, right? 7,600 yards. It's going to play short, plays directly into a Seamus Power. Kevin Kisner, hometown guy, 150 to 1. I mean, like, these are the sort of guys I'm willing to play. And like JT Poston up here, he's 80 to 1. This is his home golf course. He plays here all the time. I'd consider playing him at 80 to 1 as well. So, I don't know. Those are the first clicks when I'm thinking. I mean, up top, right? Like the first piece of value I see is probably the Matt Fitzpatrick number. He should be favored over Max Homa. That's for damn sure. And even like with the JT, I think they should be pretty similar in terms of their odds. I mean, JT's a better player, but Matt Fitzpatrick's a much better course fit. I wish Tom Kim was like 35 to win 1. I wish that Shane Lowry was like 35 to 1. If we were getting closer to like 60 to 1 on Billy Horschel, I'd probably consider that. I think you're going to find a little bit of value this week if we wait, guys, on some of the shorter hitters. I mean, people are going to love betting Scotty Scheffler. You're going to see a lot of people bet JT because it's a no-cut event and he's 16 to 1. You're going to see a lot of people probably try and get to, I mean, Jordan Spieth always gets bet down, right? Because people just love betting Jordan Spieth, myself included. I have to say that. But I think if we wait a little bit, we might get a little bit more value on some of these plotters or some of the shorter hitters out there. The one I wouldn't wait on, though, would be Matt Fitzpatrick at 18 to 1. I mean, he's at least going to stay there. I think if not, maybe get shorter in terms of his odds. He's I think he's just the one clear mistake that I see on the board at this point. Nick says, you said you love Straka, is I think what you were saying there. And you said it's Norn season. So what's Norn's number? Let's look. I'm willing to take a look at his number, but I'm almost never willing to bet Alex Norn. He just doesn't win very often. 80 to 1. Let's see. What's his top 10 number? Plus 500. Oh, geez. It's a no-cut event. I mean, if anything, man, I'd probably bet him to finish top 10, like 12 to 1 or something like that. I don't know if I can get a win out of Alex Norn in this field. Like these sort of guys up top. Like, I mean, even if they're not great course fits, like one of them's likely going to be in contention. One of them could still easily win this thing. But Alex Norn top 5 at 12 to 1 or plus 500 for a top 10. See, that'd be willing to at least take a look at. I don't know if I could get there on the outright. And he said Straka. Yeah, Straka's accurate off the tee. He's kind of that similar sort of like precision guy. I'm assuming you're getting a good number. Yeah, you're getting 100 to 1. He's kind of that same player, though. I don't know if I bet him outright. Personally, I do a lot more of my exposure in top 5, top 10s. And top 5 for Sepp Straka is 16 to 1. And look, they have these numbers pretty evenly. They're all just correlated with their outright number. But yeah, I mean, I'd probably take that top 10 number, even that top 5 number there, 1600. Makes a little bit of sense to me there, but that's all I've got, boys. Got to get to this course breakdown, some of our projections for the week. Usual slate of content that's coming out. You got 150 to 1. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense, but I think the top 10 they actually get a bet for me because like he's the accuracy off the tee guy. His approach play has been there, and with the putter, I mean, he's a top 20% putter tour. At least when he's playing well, at least of late, he's been a pretty damn good putter. If you can bet him outright, I'm going to take him top 10. I know you're crazy. I know you're willing to take on like Tom Hoagie 150 to 1. So what would Sepp Straka be, right? I mean, it's that same sort of play and it'd be the same sort of payout. So all the power to you. But that's all I've got, boys. We're going to be doing the same thing every single week. I'm thinking rather than noon Eastern next week, I'm going to try and do it earlier. Again, guys, I wake up so late. I'm going to have to set my alarm to just do it earlier. I'm going to commit to it. We're going to do like 9 a.m. for next week. So 9 a.m. on Monday morning. We'll be waking up, drinking our morning coffee, going through the slate. Pretty similar to what we had this week, but ideally, I'm going to try and get the exposure from the top player in the pool. If there's somebody that I know on Twitter or somebody that I can reach out to, I'm going to try and get an idea of some of the strategies that they were using and potentially in the future, even bring people onto the show, right? Maybe people that were able to finish in the top 5, top 10, bring them onto the live stream here so they can kind of talk through their process, what went well for them. Just the more the merrier, right? We're going to make this work. It's going to be something we do every single week for the PGA Tour, regardless of how many people tune in, because I want to build this over time. I think that the perspective and a lot of the strategy that we're talking through could be really useful to a lot of you out there. And obviously, we're just trying to get better at playing DFS. And that's not just all of you out there. That's me, myself, right? I'm trying to take a look at what I'm doing well, what is going poorly for me in some of these GPPs, and trying to just take away what I need to from that to improve. So best of luck with all of you out there. Best of luck with this week at the CJ Cup. I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit of a good one for DFS because you're going to get a lot of ownership on those guys up top, like a Rory, like a Scotty Scheffler, and a John Rahm. And 1 or 2 of them is probably going to be in contention, but you're going to have at least half of them probably flame out, right? Finish in like 20th to 30th place. It's just one of those golf courses that has that volatility off the tee. I'm looking forward to it. So any of that mega chalk out there, I can tell you right now, probably going to be a fade for me, and which is going to make for a fun week in one direction or the other, right? We're either going to win a lot of money this week or lose a lot of money. But in either way, guys, we'll be doing the same thing on Monday, breaking it all down. But until then, guys, best of luck, and I'll catch you all later.